Daimler and Benz, two names forever immortalized in the history of automobiles, and these names are from two historical men, Gottlieb Daimler and Carl Benz. Even though most of us may think they work together, the story is far from it. The beloved company we all know today, Mercedes Benz, exists thanks to these two men. Did you know that Mercedes, which is now a world-renowned luxury car, was once the backbone of the Nazi army? Well, stay tuned and stay with us as we take a stroll down history lane to see how Daimler and Benz got together to create Mercedes Benz. Gottlieb Daimler and Carl Benz both built what we call the genesis of what we all see and drive around today. These two brilliant men created what we call an automobile, and funny enough, and just by mere coincidence, both of them rolled out their first cars in the same year, 1886. Carl Benz built a three-wheeled combustion-propelled car, and Gottlieb Daimler built a four-wheel version. However, it was Carl Benz with his so-called Benz patent motorwagen who was the first to sell an automobile industrially, with his first cars being sold in 1888. And they say, behind every successful man stands a woman, but in this case, she drove the world's first ever long-distance drive by automobile. It was none other than Bertha Benz. The wife of Carl Benz drove 104 kilometers in his automobile to her mother's home and also happened to invent brake lining on the course of her journey. Her journey is now paved in stone. Back in 2008, Germany officially named the Bertha Benz Memorial Route in honor of the first ever long-distance trip in an internal combustion automobile. However, just a few miles down the road, less distance than what Bertha Benz had covered, there was Gottlieb Daimler. He too had created another car in 1886, but he was not alone. He was accompanied by a brilliant engineer and colleague named Wilhelm Maybach. Yes, the very name which stands for the top-of-the-line Mercedes cars. Maybach was named after him. He was a brilliant engineer-designer, and by creating engines is what gave Daimler and Maybach the capital to get into the automotive industry. Regarded as the first modern car and also the birth of the Mercedes name as we know, can be traced back in 1901 when Daimler and Maybach with their DMG brand made a racing car the first of its kind, which was made specifically for Emil Jelinek. He was so fond of the car that he decided to name it Mercedes, and that was not all. Mercedes was also the name of the daughter he had at the time. Later, the car that was built for Jelinek became to be known as the Mercedes 35 PS, which was the first ever time the name Mercedes was used on an automobile. The very next year, 1902, was the year the name Mercedes was trademarked, and the name that we have all come to know and love was created. The creation of Mercedes Benz. The name Mercedes Benz came into being in the year 1926 when DMG Company by Daimler and Maybach was merged by the Benz Company of Carl Benz in a forced merger by the German government. This was due to the economic turmoil at the time. Even though it seemed like the two oldest manufacturers of automobiles had to be brought together to create one company, it seemed like a winning formula. As we all know, the name Mercedes-Benz is something that's seen all around the world and is a symbol and testimony of what the company is capable of. The dark history of Mercedes-Benz. We all have heard stories about World War II being one of the darkest times in history, with the Nazi army occupying country after country and seeming like an unstoppable force, all the while committing unthinkable atrocities during the war. As a German automobile producer, Mercedes-Benz also had a dark part in it, starting from firing anyone who had any Polish relatives and even one of the managing board of directors at the time who had a Jewish wife. That was just the beginning. A good war machine needs to have machines that can work tirelessly through all terrain. As demand for consumer cars started to fall, Mercedes-Benz started to focus more on military equipment and trucks for the Nazi army. They had to make profits. After all, they were not interested in the war ending so soon, as they were making quite the profit and sales figures thanks to the military trucks, which were greatly needed by the Nazi army. But most of the men were sent to the front lines to fight. There was a shortage of men in the workshops to build more automobiles. Mercedes-Benz started to employ women in order to make up for the lack of workforce, but soon that seemed not enough, and they had to bring in men from Western Europe to do forced labor against their will. But it was not all that bad. At least they had a warm place to stay, guest houses, and even private accommodations for some men. However, it was a different story with the Eastern Europeans, as they were not paid anything to work for Mercedes-Benz. They were in labor camps and in very harsh and unhygienic conditions. It is believed that more than 50% of the workforce that Mercedes-Benz had during the World War II was either people from prison camps or prisoners of war. At the end of the war, all this was for naught, as the Nazi army was no more, and all German subsidiaries were split up and used to pay for damages due to the war. This meant that the international market that Mercedes had made for themselves for the past few decades had altogether disappeared, and they had to start from scratch. The new era. In 1954, the company reached an amazing milestone, turning over the company profits to $1 billion. $1 billion in today's money is a lot, so you can just imagine how much profit they must have made to create $1 billion almost 70 years ago. Not only were they raking in the profits, but they were also the sole largest producers of industrial and commercial vehicles, and the demand for the Mercedes cars could no longer be kept up with the existing facilities that they had. The 1950s was indeed a turning point for the company, as the word Mercedes started to mean both reliability and luxury, two things anyone really needs for an automobile manufacturer. The company was no longer just a car manufacturer. The company led in both the luxury car department and the commercial transport industry, which includes trucks and buses. Today, Mercedes Benz is still the largest producer of trucks and buses in the world, and they're not planning to be topped anytime soon. This is just the base of the company. However, the fact is just the lineup of cars Mercedes Benz is so extensive that they had different divisions to manufacture certain parts of cars. One name that I'm sure any petrolhead would be fond of is the Mercedes-AMG lineup of cars. AMG is the in-house tuning company for Mercedes, which beefs up the cars and shunts them for luxury cruisers to tire-chewing monsters. The AMG started to work together with Mercedes in 1990, and in just 3 years, in 1993, they released the first car together called the Mercedes-Benz C63 AMG, and a car which they released today is loved by many. Remember Wilhelm Maybach, the brilliant engineer we talked about at the start of the story? Well, there is one branch of the Mercedes car lineup in honor of his name as well, and although the reason for creating it was not so dignified, Mercedes had started to create an ultra-luxury version of their already luxury cars and was given the name Maybach. But things were not all luxurious with the higher-ups, as the sales were considerably low and the Maybach lineup failed to meet the sales numbers. That is when they stopped it being a separate brand and took in with the Mercedes name, and then later made the Maybach brand a sub-brand of the Mercedes-Benz. Now there are mainly two parts of the company. The Mercedes-Benz part of the company deals primarily in cars and their counterparts, AMG and Maybach, while another part of the company, Daimler AG, now deals in commercial vehicles, creating diversity between the company and allowing them to focus on their own industry. As of 2022, Mercedes-Benz is valued at $58.2 billion and is the world's second richest car manufacturer in the world. And with the electric era rushing in, Mercedes-Benz is preparing to spend another $60 billion for the future of the company. It certainly looks like Mercedes-Benz and Daimler AG will continue to be kings for the foreseeable future. What do you think about Benz and Daimler Company? The hardships, the dark history, and the success story? Have you ever owned a Mercedes? Or is it one of your dream cars? Do let us know in the comments and share your thoughts on what you think about one of the greatest and oldest automobile manufacturers in the world.